Reverend Spy by D P Denton. Chapter 5. The first few days in this new home passed without event, and Dan began to wonder if anything of importance was going to happen. The people of the church were nice, and the work there started out in a splendid way, and it was not long until Dan was going full speed in this pastorate. But in the back of his mind there was the constant question as to when he would be called upon to act as 21 plus. The newspapers and other news sources kept him supplied with information about the new ordnance plant which was to be built nearby, and crowds of workers were moving into town and renting every available living space. Almost every day Dan came into contact with government men and through them kept informed as to the progress of the construction. No one mentioned what was to be manufactured there, but Dan remembered the words of 35 to the effect that it would be the most powerful explosive ever made, and that the enemies would be trying to learn the secrets. A few weeks after moving to C, Dan was out visiting from house to house when he noticed a car following him. Looking through his mirror, he recognized 35 and saw him motion for a stop. A wide place by the side of the road furnished a semi-secluded place to talk, and he pulled in. 35 lost no time in getting down to business. A handshake, a few words of commendation about how Dan was learning the town and the people, and then he pulled a picture from his pocket and held it before Dan. For a moment, Dan studied the features of the man in the picture. There was nothing particularly distinctive about it, and Dan could see no special marks of identification. "Study him carefully," 35 said. "You may see him any day now. That is one of the most dangerous foreign agents in this country, and we have just learned that he is coming here. He is coming disguised as a laboring man, possibly a carpenter. We are guessing that he will bring some others with him to pose as his family. Our guess is that he will bring a younger man with him, and possibly his family also. He has been using a younger man as a front for some time now, and passes him off as his son. When you locate them, let me know at once, but be careful. This man is extremely dangerous, and is one of their top agents. The only mark of special identity is a crescent-shaped scar on the right side of his chin, and he may grow a beard to cover that. He is 50 years old, 5'10", weighs 180 pounds, sandy-colored hair that is getting thin, well-mannered, polite, self-assured, and can act about any part that he chooses to play. But remember, he is dangerous and will do anything necessary to accomplish his ends. Do not tackle him yourself. Simply notify me as soon as you have him located." Dan watched 35 speed away and sat for a long time thinking of his first assignment. He had volunteered to help his country, and now his first job was to locate one of the top spies of a foreign nation. He was both excited and scared, but when he finally drove on down the road, it was with the determination to find this enemy agent, if at all possible. Little did he realize how soon and how completely this was to be done. When they had moved into the large parsonage, Dan's little family didn't need all of the rooms, so they had closed off the upstairs and used only the rooms on the first floor. However, he had kept one of the rooms upstairs to use as something of a workshop and a hobby room. Dan's favorite hobby at this time was sound systems, and he had already begun to develop some interesting things about the parsonage. The one radio which they possessed now had speakers in various parts of the house. Some of his homemade amplifiers could pick up conversations from microphones placed in different parts of the house. Much fun had resulted from this hobby, but little did anyone guess how valuable it was to become. With people living in all kinds of places in the town, there had been some talk about renting out their vacant rooms to workers at the ammunition plant. Almost every day, people knocked on the door and asked if they were for rent, and Dan and Lori had finally decided to rent them if someone came along who seemed to be just right for the place. A few days passed after Dan's roadside meeting with 35, and Dan kept his eyes open for any possible trace of the enemy agent. He tried to visit every new family that moved into town, inviting them to church, but at the same time looking them over carefully. But some time passed without any trace of the person for whom he was looking. Then one day, while he and the family were eating their noonday meal, a knock came to the door. Dan opened the door and looked into the faces of two men and could hardly keep from showing his surprise and excitement. Standing here on his porch and knocking at his door was the very man he had been ordered to locate. Evidently, his slowness in arriving was due to the fact that he had grown a heavy growth of beard, but the hair did not grow so well around the scar, and Dan was sure he saw the outline of a crescent-shaped scar. Very politely, the older man inquired if the rooms upstairs were available. "I am not sure that we should rent them," Dan said slowly. "You see, this is the parsonage for the church, and I am not sure how the church board would react to our leasing part of it. Then, too, our facilities are very limited, and it would not be an ideal place to live." "But, Reverend," the man said, his face seeming to light up, "we are a church-going family, and it would be a delight to live under the same roof with the minister and his family. There are 6 of us in our group, my wife and I, and my son here, and his family. You could count on us to attend your services regularly when we get moved. We're desperate for a place to live, and will certainly not be any trouble to you." Dan marveled at the ease with which the agent assumed the role of a believer, and with his seeming sincerity, but as they talked, it had become evident that this was, indeed, the man for whom he was looking. Finally, after some minutes of conversation, Dan suggested that they go up and look at the rooms. As they looked about, he noticed that they seemed unusually interested in the view from the front windows and in the fact that they would be right in the center of town. He told them that the room across the hall was not available, since he had to have it for his own use. He did not tell them of his sound systems or his experiments, for already an idea was forming in his mind, and he could not afford to let it be known. When the men insisted that this was just what they needed, Dan finally said, "Let me talk to my wife and the church board about it. Come back tomorrow and I'll let you know. But Reverend, we're scheduled to go to work in 2 days, and we must get a place at once. If it is all right with all concerned, you can have the rooms at noon tomorrow." With that, the men left, promising to return early the next morning, and Dan and Lori talked long about the problems involved. Dan could hardly wait to get to his workroom, for he had a plan that he thought might be helpful to his country. Long after Lori and the boys retired, he remained shut up in their room, the door tightly locked. First, he spent a long time in prayer. Should he run the risk of bringing the most dangerous foreign agent in the nation right into his own home? If and when he was finally caught, what effect might it have on the church and the work of God? Dozens of questions had to be faced and answered. But when the prayer was ended, he knew that the Lord was directing and that he must carry through with his plans. Working quietly but rapidly, he removed all of the speakers that were mounted in the upstairs rooms. Then he took his strongest amplifier and moved it into a large clothes closet, set it up and prepared it for use. He did not understand this piece of equipment, but for some reason it would transmit its sound to a small homemade radio which he had. He had not been able to pick it up at any other radio with which he had experimented, but it worked on the 2 instruments, and he had suddenly gotten them to respond to each other. His experiments had shown him that they would still do it when some distance apart. Now he knew how they could be used. By 2 o'clock in the morning, he had the transmitter hidden away in a closet, and had been into the attic and had placed microphones over the 2 main rooms that were to be rented, and had tested them to be sure that the conversations below would be picked up clearly in his own rooms. Now he was ready to report. Slipping out of the house, he walked 2 blocks to a phone booth. He was now to use his phone contact for the first time, and he trembled with excitement as he wondered how it would work. Giving the operator the number which 35 had made him memorize, he shivered as he waited to see what the response would be. A man's voice on the other end of the line simply said, "Yes." Almost with a quiver in his voice, Dan said, 21 plus is calling 35. "One moment, please." And Dan waited. How would 35 answer? How was it possible to contact him so quickly? Would they discuss this matter on the phone, or would that be too risky? He did not have long to wait, for in just a few minutes the crisp business voice of the one who had answered said, "There will be a hitchhiker on the river bridge at 6 o'clock this morning. Pick him up." That was all. The click on the other end said clearly that the conversation was over. Promptly at 6 o'clock, Dan eased his car onto the rickety bridge and immediately saw a figure walking near the center. A thumb went up, and Dan opened the door to a well-disguised 35. 21 plus, he said immediately. "Our information was right. The agent we have been expecting is somewhere in this area and has already been hired as a carpenter to the plant. He also has his so-called son. Now our job is to find them and stake out a watch over them." Trying not to appear excited, Dan said quietly, "That's already taken care of. I know where they are and already have them staked out and ready to check on their every move." For a moment, 35 lost his composure and almost shouted at Dan, "What? Tell me about it." So, as Dan drove in a circuitous route through the country roads, he related to 35 how the agents had come to his house, how he had put them off until today so that he could get everything ready, and how he had now had their rooms bugged and ready to catch everything that they said while in their rooms. 35 was so excited he could hardly contain himself, but talked rapidly because Dan had to get back home and meet the agents when they came. "There is only one problem," Dan continued. "I do not have any recording equipment and could not stay in that room all the time even if I did, but I have a plan that will take care of that. If we had another room somewhere within 200 yards of my house, I am sure I could transmit everything to a little receiver that I have, and it could be recorded there. That would be much safer, too. Now there is one empty upstairs room in the bank building just across the street from us. The window faces our house and would make a perfect place for a watchman. I know I can transmit that far. I also know the owner very well and think he would rent it to a friend of mine. Get it at once and I'll move in," 35 exulted. "Those fellows think that they can use the preacher and the parsonage as a cover-up, but they are in for a real surprise." For the next few days, Dan literally lived in excitement. The family moved in. Dan's friend took the room over the bank, but he looked entirely different than the normal 35. The transmitter and receiver both worked perfectly, and 35 managed to let him know that he was getting excellent recordings. Dan also was able to talk to 35, but could get no answer. He kept him informed on the movements of the agents and passed on anything that seemed to be of value. Also, this one-way communication system gave Dan a little sense of assurance, since he could call for help if a real emergency arose. Weeks went by without seeming incident. Dan's roomers came and went and even attended church occasionally. But the newspapers began to report some minor incidents of sabotage at the munitions plant. One day as Dan drove out to the main street and started out of town, the gentleman who lived over the bank waved him down, and in a loud voice that could be heard by those nearby said, "Reverend, I missed my bus. May I ride into K with you?" And he quickly got in. "You've read about the so-called minor incidents?" he asked, and when Dan answered in the affirmative, continued, "It's your men that are directing it. The older man is handling the pilfering of secrets, and the younger man is organizing the sabotage. They have quite a number of lesser agents on the plant payroll, but thanks to your transmitter, we know ahead of time what they are up to, and are even setting up cameras and getting some good pictures of them in the very act. When we get ready to close in, we will have a good catch. Is everything all right at home?" Upon Dan's assurance that it was, he continued, "I don't know how long these folks will stay here. There's a much bigger and more important installation going in just 100 miles from here, and these folks are already talking of moving there. But before they leave, they will have their organization here completed and working smoothly. Of course, thanks to your transmitter, we will know who they are and be on to them. Now something interesting has happened. When Mr. Big learned of your excellent work here, he wanted to meet you. I don't know when and how it can be arranged, but just thought you would like to know that your work is recognized and appreciated. Any meeting with him will have to be secret, for they know every move he makes. But we will work it out. Keep your transmitter working, for this new plant to the south of us is the most important development that has ever been made, and it is bringing the top agents from every foreign country to our nation. Thanks to your transmitter, we already have the names of several agents, some foreign officials, and even some of our own government people in Washington who are cooperating with them. Yesterday, they even mentioned a man who is very close to the president. Boy, what a haul we're going to make someday. And they would never guess that a preacher was the key to cracking the whole thing wide open. By the way, have they been attending your services? Not much, Dan replied. They say that they are going to a church in K. That's right, they are, and I hate to tell you this, but that young minister is one of their men. There are 3 pastors in K who are cooperating with them, and I wish you would get as close to them as possible and learn all about them that you can. With that, he named the 3 ministers, and Dan was surprised to learn that 2 of them were from his own denomination. You know, 21 plus, those liberal seminaries are doing a great job at making communists out of the young preachers. If they keep it up for another generation, we'll see the churches openly promoting subversion, rebellion, and communism in this nation. I wish they were all true Americans like you. Now, 2 very important things before you let me out. First, keep your eyes open and be extremely careful not to arouse their suspicions. We have had to break up 2 or 3 of their plans within the last few days, and have captured 2 of their couriers with secret papers. They are sure now that someone is onto them, and they are desperately trying to find out where the leak is. They would kill you in a minute if they knew your secret, so be careful. Oh yes, it was your transmitter that put us onto their plans, so do be careful. Another thing, our man in charge at the new development south of us needs to know more about these people, and we thought you could give him the most information about them. Can you arrange a bus trip through that section soon? Dan thought about it for a moment and then said, Why yes, I think I can. There is a church about 100 miles beyond there that has wanted me for a service. The bus goes near the new development, and I will make a change in this big city near there. Yes, I can arrange it within the next few days. Then, said 35, let's plan it now. You said you knew how to alter your looks? What will you look like that day? Dan thought for a moment and then confided. I'll look like myself when I leave home. At the big city, when I change buses, I will change my looks, for they have private booths in the restrooms. When I leave there, I will have on a light gray suit, a red tie, horn-rimmed glasses, and a mustache. Then I'll have opportunity to change back before the church folks see me. Fine, laughed 35. I'd like to see you like that. It will probably improve your looks. And in spite of the seriousness of their business, the two joined in a hearty chuckle together. Now, said 35, when you know your schedule, put it on your transmitter, and I will take care of the rest. Your contact number, 67, will board the bus in the big city and manage to sit with you. He will identify himself by asking if you have seen any good movies lately. Oh, I know you don't go to the shows, but that fact will make your disguise even better. Then you can describe an imaginary movie and picture the folk at your house without arousing any suspicion from any who may overhear you. Let's see how good a storyteller you are. Okay, here's my stop. I'll be listening for your schedule. And then, with a look of personal concern which Dan had not seen him have before, he added, and 21 plus, please be careful, for you are in this thing too deeply to get out, and your life is in real danger. And with a quick grasp of the hand, he was gone.